Rain pattered endlessly against the window, while a young mother held her feverish daughter tightly in her arms, her heart weighed down by fear and despair. She had only sent one text message by mistake, yet from that moment on, her entire world changed. Silent black cars appeared in the night, and with them a dangerous man. But he became the only one willing to stand between her and the storm. This is not just a story of survival. It is the journey of finding light in a place where there seemed to be only darkness. The first winter rain fell like whispers, tapping against the window pane, cold, relentless, just like the exhaustion that had seeped into every fiber of Lana's body. A young mother living with her little daughter in a shabby apartment in the middle of San Diego. Inside the dim apartment, the only light came from the faint glow of a phone screen trembling in her hand. The dark circles under her eyes were etched deeper beneath that weak light. Lana curled up on the worn fabric sofa, her thin frame swallowed by a pile of disheveled blankets. The smell of baby powder mingled with cheap medicine in the air, the scent of quiet sacrifices of nameless long days. In the bedroom, Ellie, her 4-year-old daughter, had just drifted off after 3 nights of high fever. The child's breathing finally evened out, as soft as the wind sneaking through the window. But Lana's heart was still restless. She knew that by morning, the rent would be overdue. The fridge was empty, Ellie's medicine nearly gone. And Danny, Ellie's father, the man who once promised he would always be there, had vanished as if he had never existed. She opened her phone and typed with frozen fingers. "You promised to send Bunker $200 this week. I believed you. I have nothing left to manage with. Ellie needs medicine. The house needs money. Answer me." After sending it, she hesitated, then added another line, bolder, reckless. "I know you already got the money from the Weston deal. Don't make me call them directly." She knew she was gambling. She knew nothing about the so-called Weston family beyond a name Danny had once muttered in a drunken argument. An empty threat, but in desperation. People will cling even to what isn't real. Lana sighed, put the phone down, and closed her eyes, trying to push away the pounding headache that had throbbed all day. But less than a minute later, the phone buzzed. A message appeared, just 3 words, cold sharp as steel against the skin. "Who are you?" She frowned at the number. It wasn't Danny's. It was a strange sequence of digits. In her exhaustion, she had sent it to the wrong person. She quickly typed back, "Sorry, wrong number, my mistake." The next message came almost instantly. "What is the Weston deal?" Lana's chest tightened. The hand holding her phone grew icy. Something was wrong. She was just a single mother, not a spy, not a criminal. But suddenly that name Danny had once thrown out in a drunken haze had become a live wire pulling her to the edge of danger. She didn't reply again. With trembling fingers, she set the phone down, as if it were on fire. Her heart hammered, threatening to burst through her ribs. She leapt up and rushed to Ellie's room, pressing her ear to the little girl's breathing, still steady, still safe. She tucked the blanket around her daughter and whispered comfort words meant as much for herself as for Ellie. When she returned to the living room, the phone screen was glowing with a flood of new messages. "I know you're Lana Thompson, 1021 Maple Avenue, apartment 2C. The phone slipped from her hands. Lana's chest constricted. Only Danny knew her full name and their current address. No way. Another message flashed, the final blow of a knife. "I know enough to find you." Her entire body went cold. If they knew this much already, what else could be hidden? She darted to the window and cracked the curtain. The street was still quiet, the pale yellow of the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. She told herself she was imagining things. But with every passing minute, the dread thickened heavy in the air. Then in the distance, headlights cut off as a vehicle turned down her street. A glossy black SUV stopped silently in front of the building. Its engine rumbled, white smoke curling upward into the night. Minutes later, a second SUV arrived, then a third. No sirens, no sound, only shadows creeping forward like phantoms in the dark. Her phone buzzed again. "I'm coming." Her limbs went numb. She backed toward the bedroom, eyes locked on the front door. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That she had sent a wrong text, and now strangers were parked outside. Footsteps, on the stairs, slow, heavy. Her eyes darted to the lock. The old flimsy bolt was nothing more than decoration. She shrank into the shadows, pressing against the wall. Silence, no knock. Only another message. "Open the door, Lana." She wanted to scream, but Ellie was asleep. She couldn't make noise. She couldn't panic. In the thick air of terror, another voice rose inside her. If you don't open, they'll break the door, and your child will be terrified. You can't let that happen. Her trembling hand touched the lock. A dry click echoed like a sentence passed. The door creaked open. And fate stood there in the form of a tall man in a charcoal suit, the scent of warm, woodsy cologne clinging to him, eyes unreadable as he waited for her to step into a chapter of life she had never imagined. The man stood there looming like a shadow, given shape, breath, and eyes that could pierce straight through another's soul. Under the dim yellow hallway light, his suit seemed both elegant and forbidding, woven from silence and authority. But it was his eyes deep blue and sharp like steel tempered in ice that made Lana's knees weaken. He didn't need to step inside. A mere nod, the faintest gesture of his hand, and the man behind him, a towering bodyguard whose gaze never left Lana, spoke volumes without saying a word. Lana Thompson. The stranger's voice was low resonant like wind brushing the edge of a cliff. We need to talk about Danny Wilcox. That name Danny. The man who once kissed her forehead beneath this very roof. The man who had sworn he would always love her. And their daughter now sounded like a curse. Lana swallowed hard, her hand gripping the doorframe, as if it could keep her from falling into the abyss that had suddenly opened beneath her. Ooh, who are you? Her voice came out like a gasp caught in her chest. A smile touched his lips, not warm enough to be called gentle, not cold enough to be called cruel. Simply, truth laid bare, I am Nicholas Weston. And Danny, the man you once trusted, stole something of immeasurable value from my family. The room seemed to tilt around Lana. Nicholas Weston. That name wasn't just an empty threat in a text message. It was the surname of a dynasty that stood behind the city's most powerful investments, shrouded in rumors of trafficking concealment and a power that was never written on paper. She stumbled back half a step, instinct screaming to slam the door. But Nicholas lifted his hand, not to push, not to force, just resting his palm lightly against the door, enough to keep it open without aggression. Lana, he said softly, his voice wrapping around her fear like velvet, I didn't come to harm you, or your daughter. On the contrary, I came because you accidentally sent a message to the one person who should see it. Silence hung between them for the space of a breath before Nicholas tilted his head and his gaze hardened to steel again. But if you don't cooperate, others will come, those Danny betrayed besides me, and they won't knock politely the way I just did. 10 minutes later, Lana had pulled on her coat, forcing herself to stay calm, even as Ellie whimpered in her sleep. The little girl clung to her mother, eyes glassy with leftover fever. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here, Lana whispered, holding her close, her heart breaking. We're just going on a little adventure. A midnight trip, all right. Ellie rubbed her eyes and nodded, trusting her mother, as faithfully as she trusted the tiny bear-shaped nightlight by her bed. To a child's safety was simply having mom close. To a mother's safety was the rarest treasure in the world. When Lana stepped out of the apartment, her daughter sleeping in her arms, Nicholas was waiting by the stairwell. He said nothing, simply moved ahead each step, steady, deliberate, silent, like a promise she couldn't name. The black SUV at the curb had its door open ready. No horns, no lights, no unnecessary noise. Everything moved with a chilling, methodical calm. When Nicholas slid into the seat beside her, the driver started the engine and the convoy began to roll smooth, as if they belonged to the shadows long before night had fallen. We're going to my family's estate north of the city, Nicholas said, his eyes fixed on the window, his voice low and unwavering. Absolute security. No one, not even Danny, will find you there. Lana tightened her hold on the sleeping child in her arms. She had no idea where she was being taken, no idea what awaited her. She only knew one thing: behind them lay Danny's betrayal, the suffocating fear, the constant threat of losing Ellie at any moment. And ahead of her, Nicholas Weston, a man she didn't know if she could trust, but at least he had knocked on the door. She lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze in the blur of shadows that filled the car. Why me? Her voice was barely a whisper. Nicholas studied her, his expression thoughtful. Because you sent that message to me, and sometimes small mistakes open paths no one ever expects. He paused, the corner of his mouth curving faintly. You could call it coincidence, or you could call it fate. When the SUV turned down a private road winding through pine forest and misty hills, Lana felt as if she had just left her old world behind. The city slowly faded away, replaced by a suffocating silence beneath the heavy night. Inside the car, Ellie leaned against her mother's shoulder, eyes half closed but not yet asleep, her small hand clutching her stuffed bunny, as if afraid it might vanish into the dark. Nicholas sat across from them, his gaze appearing fixed on the window, though in truth it lingered on the fragile figure beside it. For a fleeting moment, the hardness of his features softened, replaced by a contemplation too deep to read. When Ellie let out a faint cough, Lana quickly pulled the blanket higher around her. Nicholas said nothing, but he leaned forward, pressed a button, and adjusted the car's climate, lowering the cold draft and warming the air. A small gesture, yet enough for Lana to realize he had been watching all along. "She needs rest," Nicholas said, his voice deep and steady. "Don't worry, the best doctor will see her once we arrive." Lana froze. He didn't need to say that. He didn't need to care about details so small. But in that simplicity and that attentiveness, she glimpsed another side of Nicholas, hidden beneath the steel exterior. She turned to him, her voice barely audible. "Why, do you care about Ellie so much?" Nicholas was silent for a moment, his finger tapping lightly against the seat as though weighing his words. His eyes remained on the night outside, his voice dropping like a cello note reverberating in the distance. "Because in the games of adults, it's always the weak who suffer, but a child should never bear the consequences for them." Just one simple sentence, but it struck Lana still. For the first time in years, someone had spoken the truth she had always carried in silence. Ellie deserved love, not abandonment. The iron gates ahead opened slowly like curtains parting on a stage, revealing a completely different world. The Weston estate appeared beneath hidden lighting, a mansion of stone and glass, solemn, lavish, yet full of unspoken weight. Lana stepped out of the SUV, her legs trembling slightly. Nicholas circled around, not offering his hand, but walking beside her as though ready to catch her if she fell. "Think of this as a shelter," he said, not comforting, but extending an invitation without force, only for a few days, until everything becomes clear. Inside, the mansion blazed with light, not showy, but perfectly ordered. Marble floors, soft golden chandeliers, spilling warmth from a soaring ceiling, it all dissolved a fraction of the coldness inside her. An older woman appeared at the end of the hallway. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun. She did not smile, yet her eyes glimmered with a quiet fire. "Nicholas," she nodded, then turned to Lana and Ellie. "The East Wing is ready. This is Evelyn," Nicholas introduced, "my housekeeper. Almost like family." Evelyn studied Lana for a long moment, not judgmental, but as if she could read every layer of exhaustion and fear clinging to her. Finally, she spoke one sentence. "This mother carried her daughter through the dark. She deserves rest." The room Evelyn led them to left Lana speechless. Not ostentatious, but every detail radiated safety. Soft beige walls, crisp white linens, thick curtains to block the night chill. A rocking chair by the window, and most important, a small bed set beside the larger one, where Ellie could sleep within reach of her mother. Evelyn quietly placed a carafe of warm water and neatly folded pajamas on the table. "The child needs care. The family doctor will arrive in the morning," she said before slipping out soundlessly. Lana changed Ellie into the fresh pajamas, still fragrant with clean fabric. The little girl stirred, blinked sleepily for a moment, then nestled her head against her mother's shoulder, murmuring dreamlike sounds. "Go to sleep, sweetheart," Lana whispered, her voice breaking under its own tenderness. "I'm right here." Ellie sighed, clutching the ear of the stuffed bunny Evelyn had given her, as if it were an old friend. Then her lashes fell shut, drifting into slumber, while her mother pulled the blanket higher. Lana sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of fine hair from her daughter's forehead. Her eyes burned not from fear of the world outside anymore, but from exhaustion after too many endless days. She looked around the unfamiliar, overwhelming room. No one had asked if she wanted to come here, but at least in this moment, someone had recognized what she truly needed: a place for Ellie to sleep peacefully, and for her to take one full breath without dread clawing at her chest. When she returned to the living room, she hadn't expected Nicholas to still be there. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, his vest removed, leaving only a fitted black shirt stretched across his tall frame. "Ellie asleep?" he asked without turning. "Yes," she replied. "Thank you for everything." Nicholas only nodded. Lana stepped closer, standing beside him. Outside the glass, the garden spread beneath a haze of soft lamplight. Neat rows of trees, pale stone paths curving like a fairy tale maze. It was all so peaceful, hard to believe the world beyond was chaos. "Do you often bring strangers here?" she asked, half teasing, half searching, though her voice still trembled. Nicholas turned his eyes, locking directly on hers. "No, Silence followed, only the faint whistle of wind against the window. His gaze didn't evade, didn't intrude, only steady firm like an oath. Then, am I the exception? Lana pressed, swallowing her unease. You're an accident, he said, short and decisive, but also someone who deserves protection. And here, you and your child will be safe. Lana didn't know how to answer, but her shoulders loosened as if for the first time in days a weight inside her chest had lifted. Nicholas moved toward the doorway, but before leaving, he paused, his deep voice rolling through the still air. Sleep well tonight, Lana. Tomorrow, everything changes. The door closed softly. Lana sat on the bed, smoothing her daughter's hair as she slept. In the quiet, she no longer felt darkness swallowing her whole. Tomorrow might bring storms again. But tonight, she and her daughter had a place to breathe, a fragile pocket of peace. Morning light filtered gently through the heavy curtains, soft as a caress brushing Lana's tired eyelids. She opened her eyes, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. No longer the peeling ceiling of her shabby apartment, no longer the drip of leaky pipes, no longer the mingled scent of antibiotics and moldy candles. Here, only quiet air, clean sheets, and the steady rhythm of Ellie's breathing beside her. She turned and looked at her daughter. Her cheeks were rosy, her forehead cool again. Ellie clutched the stuffed bunny Evelyn had given her the night before, tiny fingers wrapped tightly around its ear, as if it were a lifeline in her dream. A smile touched Lana's lips, light, weightless. Perhaps the first real smile she had allowed herself in a long time. She didn't need an alarm. A mother's instinct always woke before danger could. Breakfast was served right in their room. Evelyn entered silently, carrying a silver tray with hot tea, golden toast, fresh fruit, and a warm glass of milk for Ellie. She asked no unnecessary questions yet. Every gesture brimmed with thoughtfulness. The doctor is on his way, Evelyn said, setting the tray on the table. He belongs to the Weston family, more reliable than any clinic out there. Lana nodded in gratitude, then helped Ellie wash up and brush her hair. No matter how strange this new world seemed, she clung to the simple routines, small fragments of normal life, to give her child something steady to hold on to. A soft knock sounded just as they sat down to eat. An older man entered, dressed in a white shirt and pale gray coat, carrying the air of springtime calm. His round glasses glimmered with quiet steadiness. I'm Dr. Henry Dawson, he said with a gentle bow. It's an honor to care for the little princess this morning. Ellie shrank against her mother, shy at first. But when he pulled from his pocket a stethoscope shaped like a cheerful turtle, she giggled. The turtle can hear hearts, Ellie asked, eyes wide. Of course, Henry nodded. And right now, it wants to hear yours beating strong and healthy. After a careful examination, he concluded, a simple viral fever. The throat is red, but lungs are clear, heartbeat strong. I'll prescribe a mild antibiotic and some vitamins to build her strength. Relief washed through Lana. After so many sleepless nights praying for someone, anyone to check on her daughter, this moment felt surreal, sudden, unexpected, yet deeply thorough. Thank you, doctor, she whispered, eyes shimmering. Don't thank me, he smiled as he buttoned his coat. Thank the man who brought you here just in time. Lana looked up, wanting to ask more, but he had already turned away. Near noon, after Ellie had fallen back asleep from her first dose of medicine, Lana was invited to the library, a vast room, its high ceiling crowned by glass domes, bookshelves stretching from floor to arching rafters. Nicholas was waiting there. He leaned against the window, a file in his hand. No expensive suit tonight, only a rolled-up shirt and dark slacks precise to the last fold. When he saw her, he set the file down and pulled a chair for her. How's Ellie? He asked. Better, she replied softly. Thank you. Nicholas nodded. I want to show you this, he said, sliding the folder toward her. We searched Danny's apartment this morning. Lana opened it. The photographs inside struck her like slaps. They were of her, of Ellie, in the park, at their window, outside the pharmacy. Taken from a distance, but sharp, undeniable. Everyday moments twisted into evidence, proof of surveillance. Another photograph. 3 middle-aged men in suits, one shaking hands with a bodyguard. Nicholas pointed. The 2 on the right are Petrov and Andrei Novak, crime lords of the East. Danny's been selling them information, the thing he stole from me. Lana's balance faltered. She pressed her hand against the table, trying to breathe. And why? Why is there a picture of Ellie? She whispered. Nicholas's eyes lingered on her pale face. Danny has nothing left, and when a desperate man has nothing, he uses whatever he can. Friends, lovers, even his own blood. He pulled out one last item, a small, faded pink backpack with a bunny print. Lana gasped. Ellie's favorite from when she was 3, one she thought had long been thrown away. Nicholas opened it. Inside were Ellie's passport, a child's outfit, a picture book, and a thick stack of cash. His voice dropped cold as a blade. Danny planned to take her, not out of love. He thought with Ellie by his side I'd hesitate to strike. A child as his shield. And beyond that, he could pose as a desperate father, fleeing only to protect his daughter. That's how he hoped to buy pity and an escape. Lana shot to her feet, heartbreaking. Every tear she had, shed every plea she had whispered for Danny to visit Ellie, every question from her daughter. Why doesn't Daddy ever come? All of it turned into knives cutting deep into her. I once hoped he'd come back, she choked. Not for me, but for Ellie. I thought there was still some part of him that was a father. Nicholas stayed silent, eyes steady on her. Then he said quietly, firmly, "Don't blame yourself for believing. Blame the one who betrayed that belief." Lana returned to her room, but paused outside the door. Her hand hovered on the knob. Inside, her daughter slept dreaming, trusting her entire world resting on her mother. To Ellie, Mom was everything, the one who kept promises, who turned fear into safety, who transformed worry into sleep. Out here, though, was reality. A world where love could be sold out, where one wrong text could alter an entire life. But Lana knew she was no longer the panicked woman trembling at the window last night. Now she was a mother who knew exactly who the enemy was, and she would never let anyone steal her daughter away again. Evening fell slowly. The western sky stretched soft bands of rose and gold, like silk unfurling across the ridge of dark pines. But inside, Lana, there was no sunset, only a storm quietly building. She stood alone in the back garden of the estate. The place was so still, so strange, as if it existed outside of time. White stone paths ran beneath her feet, lavender blooming on both sides, its gentle fragrance seeping into her chest. Like a whispered reminder, healing can rise from pain. In the nearby greenhouse, Ellie played with Evelyn, drawing purple flowers onto paper, laughing so freely it was as if the world's troubles had never touched her. And Lana, she stood clutching the slim phone Nicholas had given her. A device that couldn't be traced, disconnected from her old life, except for one thing, Danny's number. In the library, Nicholas sat in a gray-blue shirt sleeves, rolled up the air around him, still commanding yet softened, when he looked at Lana. His eyes measured not her fear, but the resolve now settled deep inside her. "Are you certain," he asked, using the word M, more intimate than before, not forced, not deliberate, natural. "No," Lana admitted, honest. "But I need to do this." Nicholas nodded slowly. "I'll be right here. You're not alone in this." Lana closed her eyes, drew a breath, then tapped in the familiar sequence of numbers etched into her memory. The numbers of a man who had once been her anchor and had become her abyss. The line rang once, twice, then static. A rough, wary male voice. "Who is this?" Lana's grip tightened on the phone. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then her voice came shaking but steady. "It's me." Breathing surged on the other end. Then a name spat out raw and disbelieving. "Oh, Lana." Gone was the tenderness of the past. In its place, the rasp of a hunted man. "We need to talk," Lana said each word, sharp piercing through the void. Silence. "Oh, where are you?" "It doesn't matter. I know you plan to take Ellie. I know about the backpack, the passport, the photos of me and her." "Lana, no, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Danny." Her voice cracked, but not from weakness. "You have no way out, and I have nothing left to lose." Danny gave a bitter laugh, a hollow sound. "You don't know what we're caught in. If they know I'm still in touch with you, if they smell a weakness, I'll vanish before the night's over. Or you'd rather they kill me and Ellie so you can slip away alone." Lana's breath shook, her eyes burning, but dry. "You're not her father, Danny. You never were." Harsh breathing filled the line. Then after a pause, "I need to see her, just once." "That's not happening. But if there's anything left in you worth redeeming, meet me, alone, tonight, 8 o'clock. The old cafe on Riverside." This time Danny hesitated longer. Nicholas, standing silently behind her, gave the slightest nod at the choice of location, public controlled enough to keep anyone cautious. "Fine," Danny muttered at last. "But only you. Only me." Lana ended the call. Her hand still gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Yet inside, she felt no trembling, only the deadly calm of someone who had walked through the fire of betrayal and come out the other side. By dusk, Nicholas was preparing to leave the estate. The black suit was back on shoes, polished, every movement precise like ritual before a battle. But this time to Lana, he didn't look like a crime boss whispered about in the press. He looked like a soldier, quietly shouldering the weight of a war he believed worth fighting. "You're not going there," Lana said firmly, not as a question, but as a declaration. Nicola nodded. No argument, no coercion. "I'll have surveillance in place, eyes from every angle. If Danny shows up, he won't get another chance to disappear." Lana studied him, her gaze layered with fear, weariness, and something else, something wordless but profound gratitude. "If it all ends tonight," she said hesitantly, "you'll keep your word, won't you?" Nicholas slipped on his black gloves, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promised. You and your daughter will have new names, a new life. No one will ever touch you again." A long silence fell. The thought of leaving the promise of freedom was like a ticket to breathe again. But it also meant drifting rootless into a future unknown. She had lived too long on the edge of survival. Ellie needed more than running. She needed a home. Lana lifted her eyes to Nicholas. He never dressed his promises in sweet words. He simply said and did. In a world where betrayal had become the norm, he was the only one who had not broken his word. "And if I want to stay?" she asked, her voice trembling as her heart. Nicholas froze, then answered slowly as if making a vow. "Then this house will be more than stone. It will be your home, for as long as you want." And for the first time in years, the phrase stay didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a roof, a haven, a place where she and her daughter could stop wandering through nightmares. When Nicholas left, Lana stood on the second-floor balcony watching the convoy slip into the dark woods. The night wind tugged at her thin sleeve, reminding her the storm of reality was still out there. Evelyn appeared with a cup of chamomile tea, the warmth seeping into Lana's hands. She laid a hand gently on Lana's shoulder, her voice soft as a lullaby. "Strength doesn't mean being fearless. It means walking through fear for the sake of what you love." Lana nodded faintly, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. In her heart, a thought rose clear and steady. Sometimes a small mistake is really the door to where you truly belong. She didn't know how the night would end. No one could. But within her, fear had stepped aside, leaving only readiness. Readiness to face the darkness of her past. Readiness to protect Ellie from anyone, even her own blood. And readiness, if necessary, to start again from nothing. Only this time she would walk in the light. Night fell like a velvet curtain, draping the city, seeping into every brick and narrow street along the winding river. Street lamps cast their glow over the wet pavement, where the last autumn leaves drifted toward nameless places. Lana sat alone in the second-floor living room of the estate. The warm yellow light wrapped around her like the sigh of old exhaustion. In her hands was the phone, silent since her last call with Danny. Nicholas had left over an hour ago. He hadn't said much, only left her with one sentence. "No matter what happens, you and your daughter will always be safe." She had nodded, but in her heart she wasn't sure she could believe it. Ellie slept peacefully in the next room, her head tilted on the pillow like a dewy flower. Beside her, the little star-shaped lamp, one of the only things they had carried from their old apartment, glowed softly. Lana sat by the window watching the hands of the wall clock creep forward. 7 thighs, 10 minutes to destiny. A soft knock came. It was Evelyn. The woman, steady as a shadow that belonged both to light and darkness, entered with a silver tray. On it were a glass of hot lemon water and a folded white handkerchief. "You should drink something. Tonight will be long." Her voice didn't rise or fall, yet in her eyes lingered a quiet tenderness, as though she had lived through many such nights herself. Lana accepted the glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Do you ever feel afraid?" she asked in a whisper, searching for reassurance. Evelyn tilted her head, her gaze wise and calm. She answered slowly, "Fear is normal, but sometimes what matters isn't what we fear. It's who we choose to protect, even while fear remains." Lana lifted her gaze, her eyes misty. Evelyn laid a steady hand on her shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze, then left silently, leaving behind a stillness that demanded Lana find her own answer. 8:00 p.m. At the Riverside Cafe, where everything had once begun for Lena and Danny 5 years ago, back when they were poor students believing love alone could conquer the world, now served only as a battlefield. Nicholas sat at the last table by the window. No visible weapons, no circle of guards. Yet outside, every position was sealed operatives disguised as passers-by waiters, customers with takeout cups. He sat motionless, calm, cold, as the surface of a lake before the storm. 8:07 p.m. Danny arrived, a fugitive's shadow, his dark coat collar pulled high, a hood tugged low eyes darting wildly like an animal cornered. He stepped inside, scanning. His body stiffened. Lana wasn't there. No sign of her anywhere. His face paled. His breath quickened. Damn it! He lurched toward the exit instinct driving him to flee. But before he could move, two tall men blocked the door. A hand heavy as steel shoved him back inside. Danny staggered, snarling. Let me go. No reply, only the scrape of a chair across the floor at the far end. Nicholas Weston sat there calmly, lifting his coffee cup eyes flat as a mirror. Sit. His voice was low, clear. No need to shout, yet it thickened the air with tension. Danny spun toward him, panic flashing in his eyes. Where's Lana? Nicholas set his cup down, every movement deliberate, controlled. She's not coming. Danny cursed, thrashing. She set me up. Nicholas's gaze sharpened, ice glinting beneath the blue. No, she's protecting her daughter. Something you never did. Danny froze. His eyes darted around at the scattered customers at their sharp, watchful stares. The trap was already sprung. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He knew he had nowhere to run. Nicholas drew a manila envelope from his jacket, laying it on the table, with a sound that cracked through the silence. Return what you stole. No games, no negotiations. Danny's fists clenched. His lips trembled with words he couldn't force out. After a long pause, he slumped into the chair opposite Nicholas, the wooden legs groaning under the weight. For the first time that night, true fear filled his eyes, the fear of a man who realized he was caught with no escape. Back at the estate, Lana checked Ellie again, pressing her hand to her daughter's forehead. Warm, safe. The world she would protect at all costs. She turned back to the window. Outside, the city glittered with thousands of lights like scattered stars. Yet in her chest, only one light shone. Nicholas would keep his word. Whoever he was, whatever shadows he lived in, he had never broken a promise. 9:34 p.m. A knock on her door. Lana opened it to find Nicholas, his coat draped over one arm, the other holding an envelope and a small metal box. It's done, he said simply. No further explanation needed. She looked at him for a long time. On the sleeve of his white shirt was a stain, dark like ink, or dried blood. He said nothing about it, and she didn't ask. You kept your word, she whispered. Nicholas nodded. I always do. He handed her the metal box. Inside were new identification papers, bank cards, keys to an apartment already prepared in another city, a place where no one could ever touch them again. You can leave any time. And you, she asked softly. Nicholas's eyes met hers, not cold, not inviting, only sad. I stay, with the things I cannot take away. That night, after closing the door, Lana sat by Ellie's bed, clutching her daughter's small, warm hand, as if holding on to the last pure thing left untouched in her life. She thought of Danny, of years wasted hoping for the wrong man, and then she thought of Nicholas, the man she had met by mistake, yet somehow he had become the only solid ground in chaos. Tomorrow she could leave, begin again, be someone else somewhere else. But tonight, in the hushed quiet of the Weston estate, with the weight of darkness sealed outside the locked doors, she let her heart open for the first time in years. And she knew some beginnings don't come from the light. Sometimes, they rise from the deepest night. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains like amber silk ribbons, filling the room with the faint scent of last night's tea. Lana woke to a silence that felt different no longer. The silence of fear, but of peace after a storm. She couldn't remember when she had fallen asleep, only that her hand was still clasped around Ellie's when dawn tiptoed in. The little girl still slept soundly, cheeks rosy head tilted gently on her pillow, as if no one had ever tried to tear her from her mother's arms. Quietly, Lana slipped out of bed and closed the door behind her. In her heart, something had ended, and something new, fragile yet whole, was beginning. Nicholas was outside on the terrace. Gone was the black suit, gone the mask of power. He wore a simple gray sweater, khaki trousers, and plain leather shoes. One hand cradled a cup of coffee, the other tucked into his pocket. He stood quietly as if listening to the garden's breath beneath the morning dew. When he saw Lana, he inclined his head slightly. No greeting, no question. Yet his eyes were gentler than any words. You didn't sleep, she said after a pause. No need to when there's too much to think about. Nicholas replied, his voice low, steady like a stream over stones. Are you all right? Lana nodded softly. Ellie too. Last night, she didn't dream. The first time in weeks. Nicholas studied her for a long moment. Then he set the cup down, walked closer, not too near, just enough that their breaths seemed to touch in the crisp air. I've arranged everything, today or tomorrow, whenever you choose. A new city, a new name, an apartment fully prepared. All you need to do is go and begin again. Lana lowered her gaze to the garden, where lavender still bent under the early sun. If I leave, will you visit? She asked quietly. A simple question, but inside it lay all she couldn't voice, her gratitude, her hesitation, a faint spark of hope. Nicholas gave a small smile, not the smile of a conqueror, but of a man restraining himself from touching something too delicate. If you want me to, I will, he said. But if what you need is for me to disappear completely, I'll do that too. Because when I give my word, I never break it. Evelyn appeared soundlessly carrying a sealed envelope. This is the original contract of protection and withdrawal, she said, slowly handing it to Lana. Nicholas signed it last night. Lana's fingers trembled as she accepted it. The thick paper bore his signature in bold black ink, strong, decisive, yet not harsh. Just like him. There is one more thing, Evelyn continued, glancing toward Nicholas. The master has opened an account for you and your daughter, enough to start again without hardship. Lana's heart lurched. I don't need money. I know, Nicholas answered at once, his voice firm, steady. But I need to know you'll never be forced back to someone like Danny just because your pockets are empty and you have nowhere else to go. A hush fell. Not awkward, but weighted by the blunt honesty of his words that revealed more care than he likely intended. By noon, Ellie was begging to play in the garden again. She wore a flared dress, clutching a small basket, carefully collecting fallen petals to make tea for Uncle Nicholas. Nicholas sat on a wooden bench, letting her pile flowers and leaves into his lap without complaint. Lana stood at a distance watching, and inside her emotions surged. She never thought this man who had once terrified her, could awaken. A man who had lived in darkness, yet somehow was the only one leading her toward the light. The afternoon slipped by slowly. No one spoke of leaving. No one mentioned new identities, new cities, or new futures. For those hours, they simply lived as if tomorrow were still far away. That evening, Evelyn laid dinner in the grand dining room. The crystal chandelier bathed everything in a warm glow, softening the edges of a long day. Lana sat beside Ellie, who was too busy with pasta and tomato sauce to notice the heavy silence at the table. When the meal was nearly over, Lana set down her fork. She lifted her eyes, her voice calm but firm. Tomorrow I'll go. Her words didn't strike like a bell nor weigh like a farewell. They opened like a door, a path she knew she had to step onto. At the head of the table, Nicholas didn't flinch. He simply gave a slight nod, no questions, no protests. His quiet acceptance, so calm it bordered on cruel, made Lana's chest tighten. Night descended. After Evelyn guided Ellie to bed, Lana stepped out into the upstairs hallway. The air was still. Beyond the windows, the garden stretched beneath scattered lights glowing like fallen stars. The night breeze stirred the curtains, carrying a cool bite into the corridor. Lana wrapped her arms around herself, thinking of tomorrow, unfamiliar streets, an anonymous apartment, a new name, a beginning safe but hollow. It was the logical choice. Yet inside her, a hollow ache grew. Then footsteps measured heavy, sounded behind her. Nicholas. He stopped beside her. Not too close, not too far. Silent for a moment, his eyes on the garden below, his hands resting on the wooden rail. There's another choice, he said, finally, his voice low, deliberate, as though each word had been weighed. You don't have to leave. Ilana turned eyes wide, her heart rippling like water disturbed. You want me to stay? Nicholas shook his head slightly, his lips pressed tight as if even he feared the question. Then he faced her, his deep blue gaze locking onto hers. No, I don't want you to stay just because I said so. I want you to choose it because you want it. The silence stretched. Only the faint hiss of wind filled the gap. Lana studied him. Not the feared crime boss the city whispered about, but the man who had kept every promise, who had given her and her daughter a fragile shelter these past days. She thought of Ellie, of leaving, of starting again in a life where no one knew them. And then she thought of this place where her daughter had slept soundly the very first night, where she herself had finally exhaled without dread. She didn't answer right away. Her heart was torn between logic and the yearning for peace, but her hand, without realizing, rested lightly on his. Not a promise, not a declaration, just a quiet touch that said everything words could not. Nicholas didn't move, but his gaze softened as though a shard of ice inside him had finally melted. That night, Lana didn't fall asleep right away. After returning to her room, she sat for a long time beside Ellie's bed, listening to her daughter's steady breathing. The little girl clutched her stuffed bunny golden hair, spilling across the pillow like a broken ray of sunlight. For the first time in weeks, Ellie slept soundly, no terrors, no tearful cries for her mother in the dark. Lana stroked her daughter's fine hair, her heart both soothed and unsettled. All she had ever wanted for Ellie was simple, peaceful sleep, a morning with sunshine and bird song, not knocks from debt collectors or endless days abandoned by a vanished father. She gazed at the ceiling, the soft lamplight washing everything in a muted glow. A question circled her thoughts over and over. If we leave, will there ever be a place better than this for Ellie? If we begin again, will any road be safer than the one here? Out in the hall, Nicholas stood alone for a long time. He leaned on the railing, staring at the garden below, where night wind whispered through the trees. Once preparing for battle, he had seen only himself and his enemies, clear sharp, leaving no wounds exposed. But tonight, along with the weight of war, something else intruded, a woman with exhausted eyes that still lit up when she held her child, and a little girl whose innocence had shaken the iron walls around his heart. He had built his life on power and control, but within mere days their presence had unsettled that order. The next morning, sunlight spilled like golden silk across the damp stone steps, filtering through the old olive trees in the southern garden. The air was cool, pure, but in Lana's chest was a fragile calm, beautiful and breakable as smoke. She stood by the window looking down at the courtyard, where Nicholas spoke with an older man, likely the driver. Behind them, a silver SUV waited silent like a full stop at the end of a sentence. One step, and she could leave everything behind. A whisper drifted through her heart. How can a person long to escape and yet ache not to let go of this place? Evelyn entered without knocking, her presence light as twilight. In her hands was a wooden box tied with a simple linen ribbon. "For you," she said, placing it on the bed. "It's from the master, but I believe you're the one who should keep it." Lana lifted the lid. Inside was a well-worn wooden comb, a string of mint green beads, and a faded black and white photograph of a young woman holding a boy before an iron gate. Evelyn studied the picture for a long time, her voice low resonant like it carried from a distance. "That's Nicholas's mother? She once had the chance to walk away from this world, but she chose to stay not out of fear, but out of love." Lana traced the woman's face in the photograph. Her eyes looked exactly like Lana's did now, gentle, weary, yet still carrying a glimmer of light, begging to be trusted. "Did she regret it?" Lana whispered. Evelyn shook her head, a faint smile glimmering like sunlight across water. "Never, because she didn't just survive. She found the rarest thing in the shadows, true trust." Ellie stirred awake, rubbed her eyes, then threw her arms around her mother. "Mommy, are we going far today?" Lana held her close, her heart twisting. This child had grown used to leaving, to losing, to living, through endless changes without ever choosing. She kissed Ellie's hair, still scented with milk, and whispered, "No, sweetheart, today we're staying." Her eyes blurred with tears as the words left her mouth. She knew she was done running. She had fled long enough from one darkness to another, only to realize light wasn't always at the end of the road. Sometimes it began where you chose to stand still. When mother and daughter stepped onto the terrace, Nicholas was waiting. His coat slung over one shoulder, hair tousled slightly by the morning breeze. He didn't look like the man who made a city tremble, but simply a man waiting, poised between holding on and letting go. "I prepared everything for your departure," he said, his voice low, steady. "But if you wish—" Lana clasped Ellie's hand, walked closer, stopping before him. "You gave me more than an escape," she whispered, her voice trembling like her breath. "You gave me a door, not just to walk out of, but to look within myself." Nicholas said nothing. His gaze was deep, unhurried, as if a single second stretched into a season. And now Lana continued, "I choose, not because I fear, not because I need, but because I want to." His eyes softened, touched by a light he himself didn't seem to recognize. "What do you choose?" he asked quietly. Lana squeezed Ellie's hand, then placed her free hand into Nicholas's warm, solid. "I choose to stay, not because this place is safe, but because you've made it feel like home." Her words fell into the silence like a bell's chime, echoing through a still cathedral. No answer came, but in that silence, everything was already said. Nicholas bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to Ellie's forehead, like a greeting, like a promise. When he rose to meet Lana's eyes, they no longer held the gaze of a man bargaining terms, but of one who had just been entrusted with the rarest gift, her faith. That afternoon, the garden basked in sunlight. Lana brewed lavender tea in a porcelain pot Evelyn had set aside for her. The fragrance drifted into the breeze, dissolving into the golden air. Ellie sat by the window, her hair tied with the blue ribbon Nicholas had bought her, lost in a book. Everything felt strangely ordinary, as though there had never been a rainy night, mistaken texts, mafia, shadows, or betrayal. Only this remained: a mother, a child, and a man once at home in darkness, now learning to walk into the light with them. Some stories don't need to end with applause or a curtain falling to thunderous sound. Some beginnings arrive quietly, sprouting from the smallest of mistakes, like a text message sent to the wrong number in the middle of the night. And then from one reckless moment, fate shifts lightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to change the course of an entire life. Lana was no longer the woman who once trembled by the window, terrified of footsteps in the hall, headlights from black cars idling on the street. She was no longer just a single mother, cornered by bills and loneliness in a cramped city apartment. Now she was a woman who had dared to choose not out of desperation, but because her heart had grown strong enough to no longer live in silence. She had seen what few ever dared to believe, that sometimes the light isn't waiting at the end of a tunnel. It appears in the middle of the darkness when you dare to lift your head. Nicholas never promised to be the kind of man the world might call good. He still lived in a world where vows were written in blood or trust. But to Lana, he had never once lied, never abandoned her, never turned away. He didn't save her with miracles. He saved her with presence, silent, steady, unshakable. And for someone who had been abandoned too many times, that alone was enough. Ellie would grow up between two seemingly opposing forces: the tenderness of a mother who knew how to shield, and the strength of a man who once seemed heartless, yet placed his entire heart into every step of protection. She would learn that family isn't about blood, it's about where the heart feels safe to breathe. And you know something, sometimes salvation doesn't lie in who comes into your life, but in the choice to stay, to believe again, to love again, to forgive even the oldest wounds, and to choose yourself not as a victim of the past, but as the master of the future, a future born from a mistake that led her to the right person. And a man, though born of shadow, who became the gentlest light she had ever touched. Because sometimes, sending the wrong text is really sending it to destiny itself.